All right. What's going on, wrestling family? It's Roy Koyama here, High Performance Wrestling and Athletics. Actually, it's Coach's Corner is what we're running tonight as our series. It's the second episode. That's what you want to call it, or second segment. And we're going to be going over some tips and tricks, some insights, some ideas of what we can be doing during the lockdown, as well as the transition out, and then just normal everyday life in the life of a wrestler, as well as the coaches and even parents. So with that being said, our guest tonight is Coach Buck Watkins with Watkins Wrestling. He is also the head coach for was it Fraser Park, or no, not Fraser Park. What's the high school name? It's
Fraser High School. It's
Fraser High School.
a small school in a small little Perryopolis.
Sorry about that. That just
It's a small little town in Perryopolis, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and I couldn't pronounce the name of the town, but it is right there in Pennsylvania. And as we all know, that Pennsylvania is a good place to be if you want to be a wrestler, that's for sure. But yeah, we're going to be talking to Buck Watkins with Watkins Wrestling. Pretty exciting. He's been all over the place, kind of really like having a dream in my eyes of being able to travel all across the United States and hold wrestling camps, meeting just every type of wrestler, I would imagine, from all different walks of life. Last year, from what I understand, and he'll correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure, that Buck had traveled about 40,000 miles, did over 30 camps in one summer. And the goal, from what I understand, is to hit all 50 states. And that, to me,
yes, that is correct.
Yeah, that's like, I've only been to Iowa, and I've been to Kansas for wrestling, and just I can't even imagine what that would be like, to be able to travel and meet all these different coaches and kids and parents and all the different communities, because we all know the wrestling community is just awesome. Just some of the best people that I've ever met. So with that being said, I want to introduce Buck. So Buck, what's going on out there in Pennsylvania?
It's raining right now. The state of Pennsylvania is starting to turn into, well, at least my area, starting to turn into Seattle. It seems to rain here every day. Obviously, we're in quarantine here. We have a lockdown order, and we're not able to get on a wrestling mat, like the rest of the country. But one thing that's special about Pennsylvania is we have a lot of wrestling clubs, and a lot of them are going live on Facebook feeds and teaching technique, and kids are able to hop on, log on. And, obviously there's been different things on Facebook, and kids have had the opportunity to learn from some of the best in our country. And, that's pretty unique. That's something that football can't do. They can't, we had on Young Guns Wrestling, they had Jason Knopf do a 6 a.m. workout. And there was probably hundreds of kids online, watching, learning from him. And, that's a unique experience for a lot of people.
Yeah, I heard about Jason going live on Instagram on a daily basis. And I think that's pretty awesome. So, you're traveling and doing all the camps. If I just want to kind of dive into you a little bit first, is what made you want to do that? How did that all get started?
Okay, that's kind of crazy. So this is kind of interesting. So I was a teacher. I was teaching at a small town rural school in North Carolina. This 2000 15, and I just finished my first year of coaching wrestling, and I was on a 10-month plan for my pay scale. And so I'm sitting there. It's like, I don't know, probably maybe towards the end of March, maybe mid-April. And I get on Instagram and I start, seeing people talk about camps and stuff. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try. You know, there's a lot of people out there who are hungry for the Pennsylvania wrestling. A lot of people know it's the best in the country. And, a lot of people can't afford to come out to Pennsylvania and wrestle. So I was like, you know what? I make a good income as a teacher. I'm just going to throw my shot out there and see if I can get some people, say, hey, look, this guy from Pennsylvania is going to come out and teach some technique. And so I went on Instagram. I found a couple clubs and I started reaching out to them. And two of them reached out back to me. One was in Fountain, Colorado, and the other was in Rain, Louisiana. And then from then on, I started watching other people, and I saw that a lot of people posted on Facebook and things like that. So, like marketing ability. So I was like, look, so I kept thinking to myself, I'm like, look, this is what I come from, a small town. I coach in a small town. And so the people that I want to reach need to be in a small town. I need to find small town clubs, small town rural people who like to fish, shoot guns, maybe ride horses or do something outdoors. And so that's what I started attracting more of. And so, because to me, everybody has a niche, okay? Everybody's got to play a part in a community for a community to be successful. And there's other guys out there. There's big name clinicians. There's big name coaches. They have their niche. Whether they have systems, where their leadership styles, a lot of charisma, and they have that. I just like being the guy that's under the radar. I like staying under the radar. I don't obviously have a national championship in front of my name. I don't have an All-American or state champ title in front of my name. I just love the sport of wrestling. I love learning. And I always try to pick the brains of people that I look up to. And I think that's one of the strengths of my coaching is that there's not one person that I can attribute my success to. It comes from a variety of people, because there's certain attributes that I think certain people have that have benefited me as a coach and as a leader. And that's one thing that I like to do when I walk into a wrestling camp is I want to walk in and I want to walk out and I want to make a difference, whether it's to every kid in that group or whether it's one person. I'll tell you what, one of the best examples that I've had recently was a lady down in Virginia, in a small town of Richland, Virginia. She sent me a message and she asked her son, you went to all these camps and things, which one did you like the most? And her son mentioned mine right away. And he talked about using a move that I taught him, and he won a state title this year.
Nice.
Now, that to me, that, it's not about me. It's about these kids, and it's about not seeing where they're at, but seeing their potential of where they could be. And sometimes you got to be willing to, take it places that they didn't even know exist. And, sometimes that's a dark place.
Yeah, I'm hearing everything you're saying, and I appreciate it all. If there's a few of my wrestlers on listening tonight, and it's funny because we're very like-minded, and I dig it though, the small town atmosphere. Here in Missouri, some of the smaller towns around here, they're the most ferocious when it comes to wrestling, and you get some hammers coming out of those little towns, because that's all they do is wrestle, excuse me. And then what I heard, is putting all ego aside, that you're, willing to be open-minded enough to listen to others, and learn and take from them, and then, turn it into your own and share it. I love it. That's really,
Yeah, I think
that's my philosophy as well, is, is to get around people, hopefully, that know a whole lot more than I do, and absorb what they have, because that's just being resourceful. I think, and I may be off on this, but, like even Bill Belichick, he wasn't any kind of major, huge NFL player, but he's sure as heck is a darn good coach. You know what I mean? So, no, I love it, because that's, you're like using my own words about how it's just all about the kids, getting them the best resources, and providing them the best platform. That's huge. And, having more coaches like yourself, in our community is essential, at least
I think
that.
I think one thing too is the one thing that I obviously coach at a high school here that started 4 years ago, and we just recently had a guy become a 4-time PA state placer, and he's won the state title twice, and he's getting ready to go to the University of Lehigh. And one thing about us is we don't have a wrestling room. So a lot of times when I go to these small towns, they don't have the funding or the resources to be able to compete with the bigger guys.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, the small towns is what, are the foundation of wrestling. Wrestling's a blue collar sport. I mean, I understand that there's all types of people. It takes all types for the wrestling community to be successful. But when you get down to the history part of it, and the type of people that came out for wrestling are blue collar. They bring a lunch pail to work and, going to get after it. And I think that's one thing that's very valuable to the state of Pennsylvania is we've always had a blue collar culture, from the steel mills in Pittsburgh to the manufactories, out east, to all those things, to coal mining, played a huge part in the success of the state of Pennsylvania. And when I go to these small towns, there's the same type of people. There's towns that have, steel mills shut down or they ran out of coal. And a lot of these towns, going back in their history, they have a lot of tough wrestling. But one thing that I find, though, is that a lot of these towns keep themselves in a box and are afraid to get out of it. But now, a lot of these young people that are stepping into the coaching world are looking outside the box and starting to see starting to think, what do we need to do to compete with these bigger schools for us to be successful? And that's my job as a leader. I don't like using the word in charge, because I feel like when you're in charge of something, that means you control everything. And I feel like leading and being a leader is more the course I like to take. And as a leader, it's my job to find better resources, find ways to get creative for my kids to get better. That gets out of my comfort zone, because sometimes I'm emailing people about technique. Hey, I know that you're doing a camp out here. Is it all right if I drive and show? One time I drove a couple hours to see it because I wanted technique I had seen on video. I was like, man, I gotta see this guy. I gotta see this guy teach this. And so I drove like 3 or 4 hours. I spent the day there, drove 3 or 4 hours home because I needed to see it. I'd watched it on video and I thought, wow, but I wanted to pick his brain about it. Why did you do it this way? And that's I'll say this. I picked that up asking people questions, why you do this, why'd your hand go there? From my high school coach, Coach Waller, when he would bring clinicians in, he would tell them to do it like 100 times. And he would say, hey, why do you pick, why do you put your hand here? Why do you do this? And they would explain it, and you would break the move down to the smallest little detail that would make the biggest difference in whether you got the takedown or whether you got that setup.
I dig it. I totally dig it. That's that's one of the things that we utilize in our program is I call it link training, where you imagine the whole movement or the technique or whatever it is, but that whole movement has all these little links, a part of that chain for it to be a strong move. And I love it. That's pretty cool stuff. And I really like it, the fact that you're bringing Pennsylvania wrestling camps to places that would have never had a wrestling camp or even and never would have had anything remotely close to Pennsylvania coming to teach them. So that, I think, is a really high value proposition that you're providing the wrestling community. And that's coaches like us, I truly believe in, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're all about helping the community just get bigger and stronger, right? So with that being said, we're on this lockdown, and so talking to a lot of coaches and also wrestlers and parents, and it's like, what's going on? Everybody that I've talked to, and I'm going to say 99% of everybody on this call would say, yeah, when the lockdown first started, I was going pretty hard and heavy, I was keeping up with things, yada, yada, yada. And then as time progressed, well, so did our motivation. So did our focus, also our goals. It's like we've forgotten about all these things that we've been working so hard for. And I'm not saying everybody, but human nature, we're just, this is throwing everybody off. I'm guilty of it myself. I've been struggling to put together a program for my wrestlers, just because I am not in my element right now. I'm used to being around kids all the time, yelling at them and getting sweaty and having lots of fun. But now we're locked down, and if you could talk about, this lack of motivation that, from wrestlers to even coaches may have, and what are some tips that you might have?
So one thing that when I first started becoming a head wrestling coach, this was back in 2014, and I just finished my first season at the end of 2015. I sat down. We had 8 guys on my wrestling team, and I sat down with those 8. Well, 5 of them. There was 4 or 5 seniors, if I remember correctly. Yes, 5 seniors. And I sat down with them, and I said, hey, look, I'm a young head coach. Where do you think I did well? Where do you think I didn't? And it all comes back to that part. That part right there changed my life. Because once I heard them talk, I went out and I bought a book called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, who's a big name out there, and he always talks about leadership. And so I started reading his books. I started taking ownership of things. And a lot of people are like, well, what about ownership of things you don't have control of? The things that I don't have control of, I don't take ownership for, but I take ownership for how I respond. Okay? So obviously I don't take ownership for this virus coming in here, but I will take ownership in trying to get as many workouts and trying to stay in collaboration with my athletes. And I always tell my guys, I always tell them that motivation is fleeting. You know, there's a lot of people out there who wake up one day, you know, they watch a video, or hey, you can lose weight in 5 easy steps. You know, you wake up, you get motivated. That might last a week or a month, or you know, just like in the gyms here in January the 1st, they wake up, everybody's like, new goal, new year, you know, and they want to just, you know, get in and get out. And so I always talk about my kids and the people I go to in wrestling camps. I always talk about being driven. People who are driven have a word I always use. I always use the word grit. If you ever read the book by, her name's Angela Duckworth, she talks about the most common trait of people who are successful is grit, being able to face adversity over a long period of time and keep on pushing. And so once I started doing that, then I started reading more of Jocko's books. And recently, the one that I just finished was called The Dichotomy of Leadership. And he owns this company called Echelon Front. And an echelon is a group, is a unit or a group in a disciplined or organized manner there. And one thing that's what wrestling is to me. You know, it's a unit or a group in a disciplined or organized manner, and we got to stay driven. So what can I do to keep those young men and women driven throughout this whole time period? You know, obviously there's a lot of things up in the air. There's a lot of things unknown. You know, we can't control certain variables, but you can control whether you're running, whether you're getting outside, whether you're getting your work done, whether you're getting sleep. There's a lot of things that my kid, because to me, it's not just about being a wrestling coach showing technique. It's about showing leadership skills. And I think that's one thing that I value the most is trying to teach my kids leadership skills more than anything, because someday they're going to walk out into the real world and they're going to have to lead their families. They're going to have to lead their workplace maybe. Or maybe they'll work for somebody and they'll be like, man, this leader, he's terrible, you know, and they'll have to figure out how to stay disciplined and figure out how to communicate, you know, to the higher ups and say, look, this leadership isn't good here. And I think obviously there's a lot of different leadership styles. I understand that, but there's always main principles. And if you get away from those principles, then your leadership's going to go haywire. It's just like in wrestling. You know, there's a lot of different styles. There's a lot of different techniques. There's a lot of this. But there's main principles in wrestling that you have to stick to. And if you get completely away from those main principles in wrestling, it doesn't matter what techniques you're learning, you're not going to be able to perform at a high level.
Okay. Well, you know, that's really valuable information. As you were speaking, I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm so guilty of needing to kick myself in the butt, you know, and you know, if ever, you know, whoever's listening, hearing the take ownership of how to respond, that's huge, you know, because a lot of us are just not doing that, you know. We're well, I don't want to speak for everybody else, but what I have seen is you know, a type of victim mentality, you know, and just letting it really kind of define how things are, and that's not really how it has to be, you know. And I agree with you on that. Now, the book you're talking about, the new one, The Dichotomy of Leadership, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm always about books. I love a good book. And, you know, what I'm hearing is really inspiring for me is, you know, teaching leadership skills versus he was so focused on teaching wrestling because these kids, they all know how to wrestle anyways, you know. So it's not like that has to really. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, it has to be really a main focus. But the teaching leadership skills, that's a life skill.
Yeah, so let me get back to what I said there. You know, obviously I can't take ownership of everything, but in how I respond. So this past season, my 160 pounder is wrestling in state finals, and you know, he had 3 bad calls go his way, and every time he looked in the corner, his first thought was looking in the corner because he wanted to see how I was going to respond.
Mm.
Now, I could have kicked the chair, I could have hollered at the referee and things, but that's not what I'm teaching these kids. I'm teaching these kids to respond in an appropriate manner. And so how I responded was keep wrestling. Because if he focuses on all the chaos of everything going around him, he's not going to focus on scoring the next point or scoring the next takedown. And the same thing happened 2 years prior. He had lost in the regional finals. He had lost by a score of 10-1. When he came off that mat, we went in the back. Instead of me saying, you know, something like, man, he really beat you or this or that, my first response was, in 2 weeks, you're going to win this state title. And how as a coach and how I respond gives that a positive mindset or a mental breakdown right there. Okay? Instead of him focusing on that loss, he came back, you know, that Monday, what do I got to do to beat this? What am I going to do to beat this kid? Instead of sitting there, man, I got my butt kicked, you know, let's just keep wrestling. The first question asked was, what do I need to do to beat this kid? And, you know, 2 weeks later, he comes back and he beats him 9-1 in the Pennsylvania State Finals.
That's awesome.
So that's what I think a lot of people missed out on is it's just like, oh, you know, he lost. He owns it. Obviously, that's true. Okay. But he owns that loss. I'm not in control of the referee. He's not in control of the referee. But how I respond as a coach is how he's going to respond as a wrestler in the middle of that situation, in the middle of that storm. And I think that's what happens in a match. That's why if you watch people who face adversity in the middle of a wrestling match of a bad call, if you look over in their corner and you see how their coaches respond, you're going to see how well their wrestler responds in that situation.
Man, that is so true, you know, because it's that transfer of emotion, you know, and the wrestler, if they see coach over there losing his mind or, you know, going sideways, that definitely doesn't help the wrestler feel better. Composure, that's the word I wrote down is what I'm getting out of that. And, you know, that's something I should practice more of myself. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So, you know, we've got kids that are dying for a workout, you know, not just a workout, but, you know, wrestling, you know, because that's what we used to do 10 hours a week, you know, and now we don't get to do that. So, I mean, if you could throw a suggestion or two out there of what could, you know, we be doing either as individuals or as a group to at least do something, you know, similar, because, you know, we're not going to have wrestling mats at home, so we can't really do certain things. But I mean, what would you recommend?
Well, you know, that comes up to the individual and things like that. You definitely got to get creative. One thing that I see a lot of colleges do, and we did this in college, after runs and things, we would get a partner in a field and we'd work on takedowns. Now, obviously, we weren't shooting or penetrating, but there was a lot of pummeling. There was a lot of different scenarios put into those situations. And I know that a lot of people do that as well. And, you know, you see a lot of people doing stances. When you watch these videos of people doing Facebook and doing workouts and things, you see guys doing stance and motion and things like that. And obviously, too, you obviously can't be on a wrestling mat yet. So one thing that you can do, I always, as a as part of the mental game of wrestling, obviously from Wrestling Mindset, who I'm a mindset coach for as well. We talk about finding videos of, positions you feel you need to work on. And obviously, if you can grab a partner, some of the positions you work on, you can do it standing up in a grass field. You can, do it in your living room or things. And obviously, there's other times, positions and things you can't do that. So you just got to get creative. I've heard stories of guys losing weight in airports. They bust out the Airdyne and they're going waiting for the airplane 45 minutes on an Airdyne in the middle of an airport, cutting weight. Now, obviously, not everybody's like that, but people that are driven are like that. I think you got to have a few screws loose to be really good in this sport, or at the top of your game and anything. It's just like in the UFC, Tony Ferguson guy hops on scale, I made weight. Well, he's not even fighting, and this guy got down to weight. What's that? He's sending a message like, I'm ready to go. And a lot of us are sitting on the couch just eating potato chips, just trying to figure out how we're going to get through the next day. And this guy just made 155 pounds, and he's ready to go. That's a different type of animal.
Yeah, that definitely. I've been around a lot of elite athletes, and they're definitely built differently. That's for sure. So across the country, everyone is we're gonna get out of this lockdown. I think like in waves or whatever, because of the severity of different locations. So for those that get out sooner, because for our organization, we wrestle year round. I mean, this is our freestyle and Greco season right now that's getting wrecked, and it's my favorite time of the year, really, because to me, it's the more exciting matches. But, what's in your mind, what's the transition look like? Do we ease back into things? Do we jump right back in, get just, like we didn't stop? Are we going to be taking precautions? How should we practice?
Well, here's what I would do, and I always tell people this. This is one thing that I'm a huge fan of, and I think that it benefits me well. Obviously, not being a big name guy, is I always try to focus on smaller groups and smaller camps. Because your retention rate gets better when you focus on smaller groups and one-on-one time. If you're looking, obviously you got to follow, whatever precautions you have to medically, brought down by the CDC, your governor, USA Wrestling and things. But as a coach, I would take small steps in bringing everybody together. I would do small groups first. And I would focus on certain things, whatever they may be. Obviously, if we could do freestyle, you obviously, Fargo hasn't been locked out yet. But if that does come, then obviously we don't have a freestyle season. So you'll have to. But the first thing I would focus on, whether it's freestyle or folk style, I don't know too much about Greco, so I can't speak on it. I think it's a great thing. So if you're a Greco guy, you can focus on upper body, obviously. But as a freestyle and folk style guy, I think the most important thing is takedowns. I think those are number one is the hardest thing to learn is taking a guy down. I think the hardest, every camp that I do, and I always start out in my practice too, is I always throw my kids in the fire. Okay. I don't care if you're the first year guy. I don't care if you've been wrestling 12 years. So I put them my first position I do, I'll be like, look, we're doing a double leg. Okay. Most people start out and they'll say, hey, look, we're going to do penetration, step, stance, and things. No, I believe throwing my kids in the fire right off the bat. Okay? Because with a first-year kid who doesn't know anything, I need to find out, is he willing to do whatever it takes at that moment to win? I need to find out, is he willing to take a hit to the mouth? Is he willing to take that shot to the face and figure out how to finish the shot? Because if he does, then I know I got a dog in a fight. But if he's the type of kid that will turn his face, then he's the type of guy that's going to, when it gets hard, he's going to tuck tail and run. And I do this for the whole practice. I put him in every position I think of. So I start backwards. Obviously, I instruct in front, and I say, look, you're going to have this knee down. And I walk around and make sure kids are in good position. Because to me, the hardest part in wrestling is finishing. Because guys are afraid to take the hit. They get nervous about being in certain spots. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to put him in the fire. I want to see if he's got the mentality to be a wrestler. And a lot of times you'll find out that if a kid has a mentality to be a wrestler, you can teach him anything. I honestly believe that. Because if he's not afraid to take the hit and, you know, figure out on his own how they're going to be willing to do it.
Man, I love that. When you were, excuse me, when you were talking about it, I was imagining it, you know, because I've seen it, you know, I've seen it firsthand where, yeah, you have some kids that are like, whatever, coach, do what? Okay, boom, and they just go, you know, and you're like, oh yeah, good, you know, and then you've got those other kids like, oh, whoa, you know, I don't want, you know, very reluctant and testing their grit, evaluating their toughness, you know, that's legit. I like it a lot because that really kind of plays into the mindset that, you know, that you were mentioning earlier, because when you can see where the kid's at right off the bat, then at least you know what you're working with too. Good information for sure. Now another thing,
I mean, now obviously everybody has their own style and obviously everything, and I understand.
I love it. No, I love it. I'm always doing what you're saying that you do is doing whatever I can to learn, you know, and you can pick up what you want and leave what you don't want. And that's something that, man, I'm going to test that one out right off the bat as soon as we, you know, come here, Johnny.
No, because I think, because here's the thing, even with older wrestlers, guys who are veterans, they still have a hard time finishing. And I think the hardest thing personally in folk style wrestling is, in the highest level of folk style wrestling, is finishing. And I've heard top coaches say that too, that it's harder to finish in college. It's harder to finish in college wrestling than it is on the international level. It's harder to get to the leg on the international level though, because guys stay in such good position. Yeah,
it's human chess.
And I think, and I think in youth wrestling especially, the scariest thing for a little kid to do is to let go of the lock on a leg, because their dad's screaming, finish, 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 and they don't want to give up on that leg. Meanwhile, they should be letting go.
Yeah. There's at the youth level, unfortunately, there can be a lot of confusion for those little guys because, you know, they're getting coached from all different directions. And, but yeah, that's, the finish is definitely, I didn't really think about that, going from the different levels of college to the Olympic levels, of, you know, actually finishing the shots. But that I'm gonna have to definitely pay more attention to that. For coming up, I was actually talking to another coach about that today. Is, you know, tournaments this summer, like you even just mentioned Fargo, you know. So now what? You know, I mean, we've got these tournaments and dates, if you want to call them that. How do we even goal set for those? You know, what do we do?
See, here's the thing that I tell my kids now. I've talked to a lot of parents about this. obviously you don't know the next day to your big tournament. So the only thing that you should focus on is getting better daily. Because you never know when you're gonna, Conor McGregor always says, "I never get ready. I stay ready."
Yes.
And so that's got to be the mentality right now for a lot of people, is to just stay ready. Because I guarantee you, as soon as somebody gets that call, there's going to be a tournament, you're going to see people flocking there about 1,000.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I get a kick out of it because I'm on a lot of wrestling forums or groups on Facebook, and especially the youth ones, where when the parents start chiming in and sharing how they feel, it's comical, because it's tearing me apart. Don't get me wrong. I can't stand I can't stand not being on the mat and being around the kids. So it's definitely affecting us all. That's for sure.
Well, here's my thought on it. I think we're going to see a big change in wrestling out of this, and I'm not just talking about the change of scenery, the change that we do tournaments and things like that. There's going to be a huge difference in a way that kids wrestle. Obviously, during this time, there's a lot of one-on-one instruction.
Mm-hmm.
There's people in basements. There's a lot of one instruction, and the best are going to get better. And there's a lot of creativity going on right now in somebody's wrestling room right now in their basement. They're like, "Hey, let's try this. I've been thinking about this position right here. Let's try this." And it's going to keep getting it, and it's going to keep changing, and it's going to keep, getting back. That's why I think we're going to see a different breed of wrestler, and we're going to see a different, newer techniques develop out of this time period. I mean, I guarantee you, I know for myself, I've studied a lot of technique, and I'm watching a lot of techniques on video and things, and I'm sitting there taking notes. Well, what happens if we tried it this way? How could I implement this into my wrestling program and things like that? So as somebody who always wants to get better, the better are going to get better. And, the kids who don't want to get better are obviously really going to get left behind. And, me personally, across the country, I already see a big, huge gap in wrestling. It's even here in Pennsylvania. There's the higher levels, and then there's the real low levels. We're having very few people who are in the middle of, being them 500 wrestlers, just tough kids who just come out, Now it's you either wrestle all year or you only wrestle 6 months, and there's a huge gap between those wrestlers.
Yeah, what's concerning me, now mentioned that, is there are some wrestlers out there that when they're on their game, man, they're good wrestlers, but because of this lockdown, or whatever you want to call it, they're doing less than the minimum to even stay conditioned, and what's that going to look like when the season starts back up? In fact, what would you recommend? Let's kind of take a look ahead and pretend that maybe life's somewhat back to normal. What are some key elements that you utilize to get a wrestler to the next level, or help maintain their grind if they're a higher level wrestler, but giving them still ways to achieve a higher level of performance?
That's a good question. Obviously, I come from a smaller program, just started 4 years ago. Nobody's ever wrestled in the town I coach at, except for myself. I think there's
Man,
one
I
other
love
dad.
that. Yeah, that's cool.
I think there's one other dad at the youth program. His son's coming up in the middle school program. He wrestled as well. So obviously, as a team, you got to coach everybody. That's my goal as a coach. My goal is to coach everybody. Okay. One thing that's special about Pennsylvania is within a 20 probably 45-minute radius of our high school in any direction, there's a Division I All-American, Division I national champ, or, you know, a high-level guy who has a club. So that's where my guys, I know that those guys that are really high level, my goal is to get them in shape and to get them mentally ready to wrestle, and to trust that I know the technique and what's happening in the match. Okay, that's what leadership is. It's relationship. It's nothing more. It's nothing less. And so I have to. My main common goal is develop a good relationship with everybody, and that doesn't just include my wrestlers. I have to do my best with the parents, administration, my staff that's in there. I have to develop good relationships, and they have to, and I got to keep people motivated, because I got to get creative in how I'm doing things. You know, obviously there's techniques where you instruct, and then you gotta walk around the room and you gotta say, hey, look, you know, I know that you've been working on this position and things, but I think you should try this. I think, you know, you got to get kids, you got to keep the highest level guys interested. You got to keep them coming back to the room. But you also have to make sure that the first year wrestler is learning the instruction. You know, you have to become creative in how you teach. You got to be creative in how you I don't have a wrestling room, so I don't have the ability to split the room. If I could, I would, you know, and you just got to get creative, man. You know, everybody has a different style. Everybody has a different philosophy. And I always tell people, you know, does your philosophy work for your program? Yes. Stick with it. You know, your philosophy might not work for me, and that's okay. But everybody's got a job to do. You know what I mean? And it's like in the wrestling community, you know, you hear people ask this question all the time. What's the best camp for my kid to go to? And I always tell people the same answer. What are you looking for your kid to get out of? Because every camp offers something different. Are you looking for more one-on-one retention? Are you looking for a team camp where he can be a part of a team? Are you looking for an intensive camp? Do you feel he needs to wrestle live more? Do you feel he needs to, you know, drill more? Do you feel he needs to see a certain wrestler? You know, there's all types of camps across the country. And you have to find what works best for you. And as a parent, you have to say, well, you have to have open communication with your kid. That's the biggest thing I think that people miss out on, even as wrestling coaches. As part of leadership is having communication with your athletes, okay? My top wrestler, he's not very vocal, but he's a leader in the room because he leads by example. That's his leadership style. And he would always, you know, he would have an open conversation with me and say, look, I think we should try this. Now, obviously, he's an 18-year-old kid. If I was a person in charge, I would be like, no, it's my way or the highway. But that's not what leadership is. You know what I mean? Right. Leadership is you know, the dichotomy of leadership is saying, hey, look, you're the head of the team as a student. What do you think I need to do for these kids to get better? And, you know, we have that conversation. And I try to have that communication with all the guys on my team as much as possible. Some of them more vocal. There's a lot of people who say I'm not an approachable person, but I really am, you know. And it's kind of funny. Everybody thinks all I can talk about is wrestling. But, you know, there's a lot more to me than that. I enjoy reading books on psychology. I enjoy reading books on leadership. I enjoy reading books on a lot of different athletes, and I listen to a lot of podcasts. And I'm actually very big into, I won't get into this, but I'm obviously very big into politics. I have a bachelor's degree in political science, but so I enjoy politics. I just don't, you know, I got my own personal views, whatever. That doesn't do any, you know, doesn't anything like that. But there's a lot of skills that I learn from others. And I always tell obviously I know every kid in my room doesn't want to wrestle in college. So I always tell them, here's what I tell the kids all the time, and we have this conversation, and I hope some of them do it. I hope that they get on there, and I always say, hey, look, what do you enjoy? You know, some of my kids, my one young man, he enjoys playing guitar. So I told him, I said, hey, who's the best guitarist? You know, who's your favorite guitarist? It's so and so. Well, what kind of attributes does he have? Do you like about him? Okay, well, he works hard. He, you know, he jumps on stage and things like that. Okay, and I always tell people, you know, pick things from different people to help you build, you know, as a person, and it correlates to wrestling too, because you know they might say, well, he works hard. Well, you can work hard here in wrestling. You know, the skills that you take from wrestling, you can take for the rest of your life.
Right. No, that's wrestling has definitely changed my life. And just to give everybody a heads up, we got 7 minutes left. We've been having a great conversation. So I wanted to just chime in real quick, guys. If anybody has any questions, I want to go ahead and open that up for just a couple minutes here. So shoot that into the chat box if you do have any questions. Let's see. Also,
so obviously we're on Facebook Live. Is there chats there? I mean, is there questions there?
Let's see. Yeah, we've got. We just got a couple people saying hi to you and saying keep up the good work. But I wanted to ask you, Coach. You know, if there's anything coming up that you wanted to talk about, do you have any seminars, any camps, anything that at all that you'd like to mention?
You know, one of the biggest things right now is I'm taking this one day at a time. Obviously, I work for Wrestling Mindset. So if your team is looking for a way to get creative and get a mental edge, Wrestling Mindset right now is offering a free virtual session for your team. And you can contact me at watkinstrained@gmail.com or send me a Facebook message, and I'll send you to the website and give you the appropriate contact so that we could get that set up for your team to get that mental edge. Obviously, during this time of quarantine, you know, you keep hearing the same voice all the time on Zoom and things. You get a little bored and it sounds monotonous. And one thing that I looking forward to is, you know, this summer, I'd like to, you know, finish up and get all the remaining states that I have, and, you know, get them out of the way, because my goal right now is once I finish all 50 states, I'm looking to make a transition of building a wrestling room, and I got this unique theory on how I'm going to do it, and you know, what I think it needs, and I want to change the way that wrestling is viewed. I always think outside of the box. You know, a lot of people always, you know, think about looking at wrestling coaches and things, and I do that as well. But a lot of people I look to are people that I'm interested in. There's a guy out there. He's a Under Armour sponsored endurance runner and bow hunter named Cameron Haynes. There's another guy by the name of David Goggins. You know, I look to that guy all the time. There's always people who are out of the box, and I think that's one thing that I do as a small town guy is I enjoy hunting, fishing, guns, and, you know, doing things outdoors. So I always try to find people who are interested in that, you know, things like that. So, you know, I look forward to get back on the road here, but obviously, you know, if you want to contact me, feel free at any time, you know, I'll respond. So I think we have a question.
Yeah, what would be the best exercise for wrestlers during quarantine to stay in good condition to roll right back into things when this is over? We've got 4 minutes.
Well, here's what I do. I suggest doing things that you find hard, exercises that you hate. And a lot of people are like, why would I do that? Well, you know, I've learned from a lot of tough athletes that suffering, you know, brings out greatness. And right now, to me, this quarantine is a breeding ground for greatness to come out on top. because people are going to find ways to get creative with their wrestling. They're going to get creative in their workouts. So I think that, you know, doing things that you hate, you probably dislike burpees and pull-ups. I suggest doing a lot of those, and find something that's going to push you every day. You know, and you don't even need a whole lot to find a way to get better. Like I said, find the hardest things that, you know, that you dislike. You know, find a way to make yourself suffer for, you know, an hour. You know, somebody out there's always got it worse. So
I've got some trenches in my backyard that need to be dug, so I'll be hitting my wrestlers up. And
yeah, there you go. Yeah, good. Nobody likes picking up a shovel.
Yeah, I got pickaxes and shovels. I picked up, and I got to wrap this thing up here, but I picked up complacency or greatness is going to come out of this lockdown. You know, it's either they're complacent or we're getting innovative and, you know, getting after it and doing some things outside of the box. Next week, we are going to have Iowa Wrestling Hall of Fame coach Daryl Weber, also the owner of Tactile Wrestling. He's got a laundry list of things that he's.
Oh yeah, great guy. Huge actor.
Yeah, he is.
I read his emails every day.
He's a pretty great guy. And I just wanted to thank you, Buck, for jumping on with us. It's been great. I picked up a lot. You've definitely given me some things to think about, and also some things that I'm going to be implementing into our organization. That's, you know, where I truly believe you and I are very like-minded. You know, I used to be a Cub Scout den leader, and one of the things that I always taught the kids was, you know, be resourceful. And so I'm always looking for different resources, and that's why we're doing this Coach's Corner thing, because I just couldn't figure it out all on my own, you know, and guys like you are just sharing all kinds of valuable information. Just real quick, to wrap it up, I've got one question here from Jacob. What do you recommend to help making the workouts less repetitive, since we've been doing the same things for over a month? So I think,
Okay.
Go ahead.
One thing that I would do is I always tell people, you know, put a timeline on what you want to change. I always suggest 3 or 6 weeks, change up your workouts. You can always find different things. If you're a body weight person, you know, you can always one thing that is helpful now is the use of technology. Before, we wouldn't have been able to do all this. You know,
Right.
If we're back in 1990, we wouldn't have been able to do all this. And I think, you know, I hear people complain about all these millennials, you know, this, that. No, my personal thing is that there's a lot of tough people. It's just we got there's a lot of bad leadership right now. And, you know, if you can't figure, you know, I've liked these kids who question a lot of things that I do. Because it's funny, because every day, you know, one of my wrestlers would come in the weight room and he'd be like, "What are we doing?" I'd be like, "Getting better." And now, you know, there's a younger group that comes in and they'll be like, "Hey coach, what are we doing today?" And all my older kids respond, "Getting better."
Yeah, I love it. That's cool.
You know what I mean? I mean, it's short and simple and it's right to the point. So find, you know, if you're getting monotonous workouts, you know, tell yourself, well, look, I'm going to do something different. Instead of running a mile, run 5. I don't know. Find something, get creative with it. Find people that, that you think that are, you know, pretty good at workouts and things. You can always find on Google. That's the thing about, you know, wrestling and technology right now is workouts.
Yeah, you can always find something different, that's for sure. Well, hey, Coach, again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure. We're streaming live on Facebook. I'm gonna go ahead and end that now. And again, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you to everybody who joined us tonight, and we will see you next week. Have a great week, everybody.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.